Okay, Eric, I think we can go ahead and get started. It's 10:02. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar co-hosted with the Miami Climate Alliance in partnership with FIU Extreme Events Institute and Salna Haitian Neighborhood Center. Be prepared before the storm, making sense of the 2021 hurricane season. We encourage everyone to remain muted. Our chat will be open and our question and answers will be open for anyone to submit any questions as we go along the webinar. So here's our agenda of what we'll be discussing today. We'll have an intro from our director, Dr. Howard Frank, followed by our presentation by Erik Salna from the FIU Extreme Events Institute. Dr. Maria Ilcheva will be presenting on behalf of the FIU Metropolitan Center. We'll have Leonie Hermentin from Salna Haitian Neighborhood Haitian Center, and we'll finish off with some questions and answers. So I will hand it off to our director, Dr. Howard Frank, for a few words. Howard, I think you're muted.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm Dr. Howard Frank, director of the Jorge M. Pérez Metropolitan Center, vital part of the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs at FIU. Thanks for joining today's webinar, Be Prepared Before the Storm, Making Sense of the 2021 Hurricane Season. We're happy to partner with our colleagues at the Extreme Events Institute and the Miami Climate Alliance in today's session. The Pérez Metropolitan Center was founded in 1997 as an applied social science research branch of FIU dedicated to inform public policy in the region. Since then, we've become South Florida's leading urban think tank. Our work has three pillars: economic development and housing policy, performance management, evaluation and survey research, and applied economic and demographic research. Decision makers in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors turn to us for thought leadership and policy guidance to improve their organizations and communities. We are evidence-driven and dedicated to enhancing the quality of life in our region. We take pride in our contribution to FIU's national recognition as an engaged university. Today's webinar takes place in the immediate aftermath of a missed bullet for South Florida in the form of Hurricane Elsa. But sadly, today's presentation is less than 2 weeks after the tragic collapse of the Champlain condominium in Surfside. While the exact causes of the collapse are unknown, one thing seems certain. The Champlain structural failure is a reminder that resilience has a cost, and it appears some residents and board members were unable or unwilling to bear the burden. The Champlain collapse is a wake-up call for many stakeholders, one with long-term impacts likely to exacerbate the already high cost of housing in a low-wage environment. Our discussion will be the first of many to address hurricane preparedness in a new era of South Florida's ongoing battle with Mother Nature and man-made challenges to resilience and, yes, survival. Before I turn the virtual mic over to my colleague, Erik Salna, I'd like to thank Ms. Lilian Harkin for arranging this webinar. Erik, you're on the clock.
All right, very good. Thank you, Dr. Frank, and good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Erik Salna, Associate Director of Education and Outreach at the Extreme Events Institute here at FIU in Miami. And I'm going to be focusing on the hurricane season and Elsa and hurricane information with my presentation. And the first thing I'm going to do is show kind of currently what is happening and out there right now with the storm. So Lillian, can you see the satellite loop?
We're good.
All right, very good, thank you. So we're looking live right now. This is a visible satellite picture showing Elsa now that is just off the coast and just about making landfall now in the Big Bend area of North Florida. You can kind of see the outline of Florida here. You could see lots of clouds to the south over Fort Myers. There's still a very heavy band of showers and thunderstorms, part of the overall circulation of the storm. On the other hand, we've been escaping the heavy rains this morning here in South Florida, but certainly we could see some of that moisture come our way later today in the form of rain. But the heaviest rains will be up north, and as Elsa makes landfall and then pushes to the northeast across portions of southern Georgia and into the Carolinas. So that'll be the second part of the story, if you will, the effects of Elsa on their coastline and heavy rain as well. All right, now switching gears, going to my presentation. All right, let me switch, duplicate. All right, how's that, Lillian? We see our first slide?
I do. We're perfect.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so again, the 2021 hurricane season. Again, here's my name and contact information, and just a quick plug, you can follow us on social media as well, the Extreme on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All right, if you go to our website, on the homepage, you'll see the risk equation. It's kind of front and center, and it's a way that we talk about natural hazards affecting a community. And just briefly wanted to mention, the left-hand side is EMR, DR, and CAT-R. So is that natural hazard, did it cause an emergency, a disaster, or a catastrophe? On the right-hand side is H for hazard, so let's say a hurricane, and then EX and V. EX is exposures, and V is vulnerabilities. So depending on those exposures and the vulnerabilities, that will then determine that outcome on the left-hand side of how bad of a disaster it turned out being. So the larger the hurricane, and exposures has to do with the amount of buildings and people in harm's way. And vulnerabilities is how well is that community prepared, not only with preparedness plans in place, but also building codes and infrastructure. All that can come into play and the final effect on the outcome of that natural hazard on that community. So at the Extreme Events Institute, we're also the International Hurricane Research Center, and all natural hazard research, primarily on hurricanes. And so our programs are the Disaster Risk and Resilience in the Americas program. We have working on the Florida Public Hurricane Loss Model. It's another program which just got recertified by the state of Florida and the Office of Insurance Regulation. So that was great news for that model. And we work hand in hand with the National Hurricane Center on a storm surge model we call CEST. And of course, we also have the NHERI, the National Science Foundation NHERI Wall of Wind on our engineering campus, capable of producing up to Category 5 hurricane conditions for testing structures for resilience. And we'll talk more about the Wall of Wind in a moment. Want to also plug this program. It's NOAA's Weather Ready Nation Ambassador Program. If you're not aware of it, you can go online, go to NOAA and Weather Ready Nation Ambassador, and you have the opportunity, groups and organizations, to become a Weather Ready Nation Ambassador. If you're doing things to promote and advance, hurricane safety and preparedness and resilience, and how you're helping the community in different ways, you can become an ambassador as well. And it's all through the National Weather Service. And of course, on our campus, many of you already know that we have this big concrete building on our campus over by the football field, and that houses two agencies. We have the National Hurricane Center, where they're right now busy tracking Elsa. They have that 24/7 responsibility to track all our hurricanes in our part of the world, in the Atlantic, Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, and the Eastern Pacific. And in the same building there, we have the National Weather Service Miami office, who have been very busy as well, taking all that forecast information from the National Hurricane Center and then making it more detailed as to what our effects could be here in South Florida. And just briefly looking back to last year's season, a record-breaking season, the 2020 season with 30 named storms. And the list, as you know, was used up and we had to go to that backup list, which was the Greek alphabet, making it all the way to iota. And that broke a record. We hadn't done that since 2005. And news since then, it's been decided that they will no longer use the Greek alphabet as the backup alphabet if we should use up the current list, and we're hoping we never do again. But they've come up with a alternate list of more typical names to use if we have to. And again, we're hoping we won't have to. So here are the numbers. So first of all, you look at this chart, average 2020 and 2021. And as you look at that, the average season, which climatologically in the last several decades, those numbers have come up a bit. They just changed that. So an average season will see 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 majors. That's an average look at it. You can see how 2020 was. 30 named storms, 13 hurricanes, 6 majors, a record-breaking season. And so the forecast for 2021 is 17 named storms, 8 and 4. So certainly nothing like last season, but still an above average season is expected. And I have down on the bottom here in yellow that what coincides with this increased activity is that we started an active cycle that started in 1995. It lasts for about 25 to 30 years. So that's one reason we're seeing these seasons with above average activity, because of this natural process that happens every 30 years or so, where we have an active cycle and then an inactive cycle. And we're obviously still in the active cycle. All right, here are the names for this year. And we've already used Anna, Bill, Claudette, Danny, and of course now Elsa. Next name on the list will be Fred. Be nice if we never used Fred, but here's the rest of the list, and we'll have to wait and see how many storms we get this season. So as far as expectations, and it is expected to be above average, it has to do with the ingredients, if you will, the conditions to help form hurricanes. And just briefly, some of the major reasons for the expectation for this to be a busy season, and it already has started out quickly. You know, that Elsa, the E name, that's the earliest we ever saw the E name used in a hurricane season, even beat out last year's Edward from the 2020 season. It's not a good sign. We're hoping things slow down, but things that are happening out there is, you know, we all have a hurricane or a rainy season every year. Well, West Africa has a monsoon season. So that's very active. That adds to the amount of moisture and activity to the season. There's weaker trade winds, the winds that blow from the east to west. And of course, we certainly have lots of warm ocean temperatures. So the ingredients are there to form storms. Now, where are they going to go? We hope they all spin their wheels out in the Atlantic, not like Elsa, which came by Florida, but it all has to do with steering currents. And we don't know what those steering currents are going to be from week to week. We're hoping they'll be favorable, that they'll be allowed to curve and miss the United States and the Caribbean. Last season, as we know, the steering currents prevented most of the storms from turning north. Every season is different. And last season, they all headed towards the United States. And of course, we've had effects already this season. So we're hoping we'll have favorable steering currents. As far as the season, it's already started out active, but we're nowhere near the peak, the statistical average of the busiest part of the season. I like to say it's August, September, October, those 3 months. September statistically the most busy, but for Florida statistically, we've had many landfalls in the month of October. So we have to go all the way through October before statistically we see the end of, you know, the chances for storms coming here. So we just had Elsa. Now this was Hurricane Irma's cone, and I just wanted to briefly talk about the cone and what does it mean? As we were watching the news and the weather reports for Elsa, we are seeing the cone. And what is your understanding of the cone? What does it show us and what does it not show us? Well, the cone will show us geography. Where is that storm expected to be for the next 5 days? They used to be 3-day cones. Of course, now they're 5-day cones. So it'll show how far and where it might be at 5 days, and can be anywhere in the cone. There is a center line, but the storm doesn't necessarily follow that center line. So if you're in the cone or near the cone, you have to prepare. And there are occasions when the storm will go outside of the cone. And you also see in this particular case with Irma, you see in red hurricane warnings. So they will signify tropical storm watch and warnings, hurricane warnings, and show you that timeline. Now, also in the middle, they have H's and M's. M stands for major hurricane. H stands for category 1s and 2s. The M's are category 3, 4s, and 5s. So beyond the cone, that's what's most important. What we really need to focus on is the hazards. And when Elsa was approaching, you know, there were hazards expected, but it was a very difficult forecast. There was lots of uncertainty on day 4, day 5 of the cone because of various factors, interactions with the mountains of Cuba and so on and so forth. And, you know, situation where it'll keep it from going to a hurricane. And we saw Elsa become a hurricane, become a tropical storm, then became a hurricane yesterday, but only a Cat 1. So it didn't have a great environment for rapid intensification, thank goodness. But it's these other graphics. When you go to the National Hurricane Center website, this is what's important for us to kind of narrow then in on what is most important for us. So when you talk about storm surge watches and warnings, the cone, wind speed probabilities, they also have graphics showing you what time those tropical storm force may approach, storm surge inundation, and of course, how much rainfall is coming. So that's what's more important than the cone. The cone is important, gives us a snapshot of where it may be geographically, but the weather doesn't happen just in the cone. If you're not in the cone, doesn't mean you're not going to get weather. If the storm is going to be coming near our area, it will bring all kinds of weather. And that's the misconception about the cone. If you're not in the cone, you're safe, but that's not the case. So where can you get some of this additional specific information? Well, for all of us in South Florida, our National Weather Service office, as I said, located on the FIU campus, go to their website, Miami National Weather Service office. And they're the ones that'll give you specific information on the storm's effects for South Florida. And they were doing that all weekend long for Elsa. So no matter where you are in the country, go to your local National Weather Service office. Local media will also be showing information, but the local office of the Weather Service, this is now examples of the graphics that our Miami office was showing for Elsa. It was showing you the wind threat, the flooding rain threat, the storm surge threat, the tornado threat. And all this was displayed during the storm on their website. So they will then take the big picture graphics and then bring them down closer to home and make them more specific for South Florida so we can see in more detail what our expectations are. And these are more examples of what the National Weather Service Miami was showing for Elsa. And you can see all those little thumbnails of different things that you could look up for: flood, coastal flood, rip current, tornado, water spout. And this one I've highlighted was the flood hazard. So again, this is what was being displayed over the weekend in the last couple of days, and with expectations of Elsa. Storm surge. It really wasn't something that we were so concerned about here on our coast in South Florida, except down in the Keys, where they had some minor storm surge. But that is a big concern of the National Hurricane Center and the dangers that storm surge presents. So several years ago, they issued storm surge watches and warnings. We've always had hurricane watches and warnings, but storm surge watches and warnings are fairly new. But again, it's putting that emphasis and focus on the danger of life-threatening storm surge And during an event, you'll see storm surge watches and warnings issued, which was started to happen for the Keys and parts of Southwest Florida. And then what kicks into gear is evacuations. And of course, who has to evacuate? Well, all of us, no matter where we live, need to know our evacuation zones. So here's the map for Miami-Dade County showing the zones for evacuation. So if you live in an evacuation zone, you're going to have a more detailed preparedness plan. It's more than just preparing your family and your home. If you're going to evacuate, the questions now are, where are you going to go? How far are you going to travel? Who are you going to spend the time with? And if you have pets, you never leave pets behind. You need to bring those pets with you. And if you're going to be going to a family member's home inland, away from the evacuation zone, do they have pets? And so on and so forth. So the best is to evacuate in county, as little distance as possible, so long as you're out of the evacuation zone. So again, family member, relative, friend's home, rather than trying to drive long distance on I-95 or the Turnpike. So try and find a location, and obviously the county will be setting up evacuation shelters as well as another option. With these systems, you can get flooding rains, and National Weather Service has their slogan, when flooded, turn around, don't drown. So after an event, especially not wanting to drive around in the community where there's flooded streets, and that can be dangerous. And all of us need to consider flood insurance. And we have a homeowner's policy, we have insurance on our home, but it doesn't cover flood insurance. You have to talk with your insurance agent about getting flood insurance and knowing where you live, what community you live in, and is it prone to flooding from heavy rains? Are you close to the coast? And it's sometimes required, but sometimes not required. Where I live, it's not required, but if it's not required, it's not that expensive. So everyone's family budgets are different. And if you can afford it, even when it's not required, it's certainly a recommendation. Beyond that, now it's your home. So all of us have to strengthen our home and be ready for hurricane force winds. So an option to figure out, okay, what do I need to do to my home? You can get a wind mitigation inspection. And with a certified inspector, they'll go through your home, check the roof and the windows and the doors, garage door, and give you a scorecard, if you will, of what you would need to do to further mitigate and strengthen your home to ride out the next storm. And there's certain things that can be looked at, of course, up in the roof, hurricane straps, that's required, building code requires, but it's something that it certainly holds the roof on. There's an analysis of the straps. And if anyone's going to be replacing a roof, that's the time to even add more straps. The garage doors are weak links, as we say. If a garage door fails, that stresses the roof. So making sure you have a strong, new code-approved garage door that will not fail during the hurricane. And flying debris is everywhere. These are pictures from Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. We had similar pictures during Andrew, but the danger of flying debris. So protecting our windows, there's wood and there's metal. And we all know metal is stronger than wood. Plywood is a product that's still used widely, but it's certainly very labor intensive. It's not easy to put up. It should be at least 3/4 inch in width. And to cut those panels and put them on a home or a business takes a lot of time, and it's a lot of hard work when we have lots of heat and humidity. If business or family family can afford and eventually get metal panels, that's the next step up, and then various metal shutters to protect those windows, because plywood could fail, and if it's not put up correctly, it may not perform as well either. And one thing we have to stop doing, and that is using tape. We used to all do this. Well, that was old education. We now have new education. New education, don't use tape. Tape does absolutely nothing, okay? So beyond tape, use your time in other more useful ways in protecting your home. And we're still trying to get the word out with education and outreach with regards to tape. All right, now I'm going to show a short video. This was a demonstration we did at the Wall of Wind showing the effectiveness of mitigation. And there's no sound on this video. I'm just going to talk over it. But there's our wall of wind. Again, 12 fans that we can create up to Category 5 hurricane conditions. So we had a media team come. And a media team wanted to see a destructive test. They wanted to be seeing something blow out the door. And we understood that. And we said, okay, but we want a teachable moment at FIU. We want to talk about how not to have something blow up, how you can actually protect a home or a business. So we came up with this structure. The one side was called the strong side that had metal shutters and roof tie downs. And the other side was called the weak side. It did not have those roof tie downs, those straps and metal shutters. So we hit the strong side first with up to Category 4 hurricane conditions. No failure. Reinforced for less than $250. Then we turned the building around to that weak side with no roof tie downs and no shutters, and watch what happens. Catastrophic failure. Watch that roof. So it shows you that flying debris can run into a building, and then as a building falls apart, that becomes even more flying debris. So the importance of protecting all our windows. There goes that roof again. You can see how far it became airborne and landed about 200 feet downwind up against our safety wall. All right, now in our home, just before the hurricane comes into our community, one last thing you can do is all of us to close all our interior doors to our closets, our bathrooms, our bedrooms. It's one last line of defense on defending the integrity of the building. And all of us need to know if a storm is coming ashore at one of the last things we do then, we all have to huddle up in our safe room. So all of us have to find and designate and determine where's that safest room in your home, an interior location away from windows, away from exterior walls. And typically that's usually an interior hallway or interior bathroom. And now to planning. As I mentioned, we now have these 5-day cones. So one recommendation, as I talk about even with the business community, is having a to-do list. And since we have a 5-day cone, you could take your master to-do list and divide it up into 5 days from landfall. So on day 5, you don't do everything on your list, but at least that's the first day you start communicating with your team and making sure everyone is aware. And as long as we stay in the cone, that to-do list continues with day 4, day 3, day 2, until you're ready with everything, day 1, 1 day before landfall. Just a thought on how to divide up your plan. And part of our plan, of course, personally, is having our hurricane survival kit items. So dry and canned food, water, cash, flashlights, batteries. So if the forecast was predicted, yes, it was going to be, let's say, a Category 1 hurricane making landfall here in South Florida, were you ready? Did you have all your items? Or were you going to have to quickly run to the grocery store or the home improvement stores Friday, Saturday, Sunday, a holiday weekend, 4th of July weekend? It's the last thing any of us wanted to do was worry about a hurricane. We wanted to enjoy the holiday. But if that forecast had changed, we would have had to change our plans. So were you ready? So at least now Elsa kind of woke us all up to review our survival kit and check a stock of items and start getting those items now before the next potential storm. Generator safety, the power is going to go out. That's why we need flashlights and batteries. But unfortunately, we just heard from our governor that more people have lost lives from carbon monoxide than from hurricanes in the state of Florida. You would think generator safety is common sense, but we still need to get the word out that you never run a generator inside a home. It needs to be outside that home, not in the garage, away from an exterior window because of that deadly carbon monoxide gas. And the National Hurricane Center this season is going to be putting more emphasis on generator safety to make sure we're using them safely. They're a great tool to have when the power goes out, but you need to be careful. To get all of this preparedness information, there's many sources, but the Miami-Dade County of Emergency Management is certainly one of those sources that we can turn to for all of this information. We also did a 12-part hurricane education video series. You can go to MOD's Eye of the Storm to get information on all these topics that we just covered. And one last piece here is that we have created a Spanish hurricane website with the National Hurricane Center. huracanes.fiu.edu is another source for information. All right, well, I thank you very much on this part. So now we will move on, and I will now hand it off to Dr. Maria Ilcheva with the Pérez Metro Center.
Thank you, Erik. Wow, what a great presentation. So much information to unpack there. And thank you for the work in informing our community and getting us ready for these really dangerous events, whether we're talking about hurricanes or flooding or tornadoes. My presentation today will focus on one area of research that we've been involved in for over a decade now, and specifically the findings from our hurricane preparedness and mitigation poll. For over a decade, as I said, we've been involved in tracking Florida's culture of preparedness through that survey of coastal residents. And we're also researching various other topics related to resilience. But what I will focus on today is telling you what the results from the 2021 data collection show, which we did just 3 weeks ago. It's always done in the beginning of hurricane season, the first couple of weeks of June. So it's very current, very relevant data that helps us understand where our community, the Florida community, stands in terms of preparation. The focus of our research has been on Florida's coastal counties, based on how they're defined by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Actually, 61 of the 67 counties in Florida qualify as coastal. While the topics of our research have varied over time, as I said, one endeavor has been the hurricane mitigation poll, which is the longest running survey of Florida resident attitudes on this topic. We started in 2006 in order to track perceptions of hurricane threat and preparedness, but over the years, the baseline poll has been expanded to include questions on sea level rise, what residents' expectations are of government, questions on homeowner insurance, and also specific measures that residents and governments can take to mitigate the effect of hurricanes. As I said, we collect the data in the beginning of hurricane season, the first 2 weeks of June. A few kind of snippets that I want you to think of as I'm providing some of the data. First, we see overall that there has been an increase in risk awareness and preparedness. I'm talking the long-term, the big picture view since 2006. Which, though, that awareness of risk and preparedness fluctuate depending on the hurricane threat, on the perception residents have of the threat hurricanes pose. Secondly, about a third of Florida homeowners are not aware of the effect of sea level rise, or they don't believe they will be affected. Interesting finding in itself. Again, we see a gradual increase in those who in the increase in awareness, but sizable portions of our residents are still not where we need them to be in terms of that understanding of risk. And third, there is a growing expectation that government, especially state and local governments, should play a leading role in resilience. We know that Florida is a coastal state, and approximately 80% of the state's population lives in proximity to the ocean and is thus vulnerable to sea level rise. So that those expectations that government will take a leading role, coupled with that kind of lack of awareness for large segments, are important, is important information that could be used to direct policy. The trend analysis from our data shows that there is a hurricane effect on preparedness. I mentioned to you that those fluctuations year after year, but we generally see an uptick in preparedness immediately following a major hurricane. And the effect gradually tapers off, especially with the absence of a direct impact in following years. Generally, after a couple of years without a direct hurricane impact, Florida residents reach a level of complacency. And even those who have been in the state at the time of a hurricane threat relax their preparations. Added to that trend that you see on the table, on the chart here, is the fact that a significant number of people in Florida, given the nature of our state with high numbers of people moving in and out of the state every year, many may have never experienced a hurricane, as they may have moved from either another state. That were about 250,000 people actually moved in the nine densely populated urban coastal counties, moved in them over the last year, and another 150,000 again in those 9 counties moved from outside the country. The 2020 results show that the impact of the previous season, as well as the pandemic. Again, I'm reminding you, we collected the data in June 2020, as we did as well as in June 2021 this year. As Erik mentioned, the 2019 Atlantic hurricane season was above average, actually the 4th consecutive above average and damaging season, dating back to 2016. As a result, in 2020, we saw an increased perception of vulnerability, but a lower percentage, and that's where the pandemic impacts were felt, indicated willingness to evacuate if ordered. A record 6 hurricanes hit the United States in 2020, but they all missed Florida. We were lucky that way. And as a result, in 2021, the percentage of residents who felt vulnerable to a hurricane decreased. This decrease is also linked to another interesting finding. Our survey shows that 8% of coastal county households indicated the pandemic had changed their plans on how to respond if a hurricane is threatening their area. So it was 18% in 2021. In 2020, it was 36%. Again, as the pandemic, as we see a light at the end of the tunnel, as we say now in these near post-pandemic conditions, we see the decrease in those percentages. And by the way, 1 in 5 residents would never evacuate, even those who are in evacuation zones. Erik covered that we need to be aware of what our flood zone, what our evacuation zone is. But 1 in 5, even among those who are in such zones, would never evacuate. The next information piece is related to various efforts that governments can take in terms of planning and in terms of policy to mitigate the impact of hurricanes. We started asking these questions in 2017, so we have a 5-year data of which I show you 2 snapshots, the 2017 and 2021 comparison of results. In general, as you know, after Andrew, government efforts were focused on revising and updating the building code and dedicating resources towards code enforcement. Our survey results show that a very large percentage of residents have reasonable to very high confidence in enforcement, about 82% in 2021. Again, the survey data was collected before the Surfside building collapse, so I anticipate we might see a decrease in confidence in next year's data in that regard, related to local building code enforcement. In 2017, only about 2/3 had a high degree of confidence that local land use planning takes into account hurricane risks or that new development takes into account flood risks. We see an uptick of confidence in the last few years as a result of the fact that a larger number of jurisdictions and residents are starting to pay attention to these topics and understand the importance of such efforts. And all of these efforts ultimately could improve community resilience. And on the topic of resilience, we also ask questions on specific actions, again, government could undertake to mitigate the negative impact of sea level rise. There is a connection between sea level rise and hurricane threats. As sea levels rise, obviously, there is a greater risk in a hurricane event of water inundation into properties, into infrastructure. We see increases in residents who are inclined to support government action across all measures, all of these actions that we asked about, but there is no consensus or even a majority who agree on one specific action. In 2021, 43% agreed on the need to implement stricter elevation plans for homes in vulnerable areas, as well as for governments to have authority to regulate development. With the realization that government measures most likely will have costs, we also ask questions about residents' willingness to pay for these measures. First, almost a quarter think no action should be taken. Last year, a majority of those who believe government at either federal, state, or local level should take the leading role are willing to have their taxes increased. This year, we see 46% indicating that willingness to assume some of the cost either for property or income tax increases. These fluctuations are affected obviously by economic conditions. Given the continued effects of the pandemic on many households in Florida, this reluctance to pay for resilience is unsurprising. But another explanation might be related again to the growth of the state and the influx of residents from other parts of the country or other countries, as I mentioned. The lack of experience with hurricanes, flooding, and wind damage may be creating inadequate risk awareness. These two factors are also reflected in several other interesting results. First, rising insurance costs are leading to an increasing number of households who intend to cancel their insurance policies if their mortgage is paid off. Many of them would self-insure, meaning they will put away an emergency fund for repairs to their home when needed. But we also have to remember there is a very large proportion of households that we call cost-burdened households that pay very high percentage of their income in excess of 30 or even 50% of their income on housing and related costs. So the ability of cost-burdened households to put away an emergency fund is questionable, and it may create challenges down the road of either lack of insurance or inadequate insurance to cover any damages. The graphic that you see here shows the distribution of responses in terms of the factors that affect residents' home purchase decisions. Unsurprisingly, neighborhoods, price, and school quality were the top three. The importance of flood zone designation is decreasing in importance. In 2020, we saw about 10% considered the flood zone an important factor in their home purchase decision. In 2021, that percentage went down to 7%. Again, it's related to the type of growth we experience in the state, influx from other states or countries, and generally economic conditions, which may put a higher value or a higher weight to the cost of the home and the neighborhood and the school than the flood zone designation. Notice also at the bottom of the chart that flood zone was considered among the top 3 factors by only 1 in 10, and insurance rate was selected by only 2% in our responses. The low percentage choosing flood zone as a factor, again, could be linked to inadequate assessment of risk. There has been some legislation introduced in Congress that would require FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, to develop a minimum national standard for flood disclosure in communities that participate in the flood insurance program. Florida, even though it's the most flood-prone state in the nation and holding about 40% of the flood insurance policies, has no flood disclosure law whatsoever. Federal policy does require lenders to notify borrowers, but only if the borrowers are required to have flood insurance. And there are no statutory or regulatory requirements that the seller must disclose past flood damages. So as individuals make these purchase decisions, they may have incomplete information, and therefore, as I said, their risk awareness may be inadequate. I will finish with a few takeaways. As I mentioned, as I started my presentation, risk factors continue to increase, and fiscal sustainability may be lacking at the individual level. The ability of residents or the awareness that can lead to improve their ability to pay for mitigation improvements of their homes or address any structural damages as a result of hurricanes may be too low as a result of these challenges. There will be many households who will be unable to recover on their own, and there will be an expectation that government will need to step in for financial support, for rebuilding, and to subsidize insurance costs. You've been hearing on the news quite consistently about the continued increases in insurance costs. It's happening throughout the state. And if you recall, we had our state had embarked on an effort to, I quote, as I'm not a particular fan of that word, depopulate Citizens, which is the state insurance company. But we see the numbers of insurance policies with Citizens gradually rising, again, as a result of the rising costs on the private market. Households' vulnerability and resiliency directly impact the financial vulnerability for government, especially local government. Imagine a situation like Andrew, in which we have a devastating storm and it destroys large swaths of our properties. There has been, within recent years, an attempt to use general obligation bonds to fund resiliency projects as a way to stave off such major disasters and at least improve the infrastructure as a way to mitigate these problems. However, there has been very little invested on bolstering citizens' resilience. We have to keep reminding people, individuals, and in our communities that coastal projects typically protect assets, not the inhabitants. And we need to build, in order to build resilience, we need to focus also not just on infrastructure resilience, but on the economic aspects of it. Our survey showed there is a growing expectation, as I said, that government should play a leading role in reducing the effects of rising sea level. And there are some actions that have been suggested, including stopping coastal growth, or at least slowing down coastal growth, which for many governments may be an unlikely proposition. At least it used to be, until we start feeling, at least it will be until we start feeling these impacts on the older housing stock in our communities. Another more plausible course of action is to take the longer view and establish control over urban development in hazardous areas. It's clear, though, that without taking any action, our vulnerabilities, our risk, and ultimately the consequences we suffer will increase in the future. Obviously, we need to take into account the scientific evidence. We need to have strong building codes with elevation and drainage requirements, as well as the appropriate land use policies that will incentivize governments and residents to make hard choices about location of development, cost, and risk. We've seen some efforts in that regard, and South Florida is considered a leader in such efforts, in raising awareness, in trying to enforce certain standards for buildings, but much more needs to be done in order for us to really become a resilient community. And the same could be said for most coastal communities across the United States. So in order to ensure the prevention of loss, to prevent the loss of life, property, and revenue, we all have a responsibility, we all have a role to play. And I will stop here and give the floor to our community representative, who will talk about the challenges as she and her organization see them, and how they address them for one of the vulnerable populations in our community that doesn't receive sufficient attention. I will stop here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Maria. Yes, next up, we're going to go with Leonie Hermanton with the Salna Haitian Neighborhood Center. Leonie, take it away.
Good morning. Is my presentation okay? All right. Thank you very much. Next page, please. Our presentation is called Nous Paraît Creole for Are We Ready? And it's really about the issue of preparedness for the Haitian community. So next page, please. Next slide. Yes, just a little bit about Salna. Salna Haitian Neighborhood Center is a social service agency located in North Miami. We serve over 12,000 individuals and families a year. Our programs are mission aligned to empower, strengthen, and uplift South Florida Haitian community to linguistic and cultural capacity. We serve Haitians mostly, but we welcome all. Clients primarily are residents of the Northeast Corridor, which includes Little Haiti, North Miami Beach, and Miami Gardens. While we're not speaking about the status of the entire Haitian American community in Miami-Dade County, we are focusing on a specific group, low-wage earner, working primarily in the service sector with average household income of $28,000 and often less than that. As per the United with Alice report, about 68% of our targeted population living in the Northeast Corridor, about 68% households live in poverty. A large percentage of residents, particularly in North Miami, Little Haiti, North Miami Beach, and certain parts of Miami Gardens, are of Haitian descent. The challenges, of course, I was stated by Dr. Ilcheva, is low wages. Low wages and working in jobs, for example, where people are sent home if there's no work. Without any support, they don't get paid. You don't work, you don't pay, you don't get paid. And that's the reality for many of our constituents. They have very limited benefits. And again, if the restaurant or wherever it is closed, they do not get paid. They have limited access to the internet and therefore information. They most have phones, and internet on their phones, but they don't know how to access the internet. That's a major issue. That's a major challenge in our community, where a lot of the information now is dispensed through the internet. Many have a lack, again, the targeted population that I'm referring to. I don't want you to think that it's the entire spectrum of the Haitian American community, but those that I'm referring to have a lack of English proficiency. They don't understand English very well and don't speak it very well. And in some cases, particularly with middle to older age population, they have limited literacy. They cannot read or write in any language. So don't write it in Creole, because if they can't read it, they cannot read it in Creole. So, sometimes strategies mean that you're going to translate everything, print flyers. If people can't read, they can't read. And so that information is meaningless. And of course, lacking information. Because they rely on less traditional methods of information. It's not necessarily Channel 7. It's usually Haitian radio. And if there is, and luck of the draw, Haitian radio will provide up-to-date information and some will not. So again, the access to information is limited, not just during the hurricane, but before the hurricane. Folks don't know, you've had Dr. Salna made a beautiful presentation about how to protect your home, how to evacuate if you need to. Most of people don't have that kind of information. While Salna serves as a hurricane preparedness hub, assisting folks with information. We've distributed hurricane kits, and in doing so, we've explained what it meant, what they needed, but it's still limited in terms of the scope of the information that's needed. Next page, please. And the community assets is that most of our people have experienced hurricanes personally. As you know, Haiti sits at this crossroads of hurricanes. I mean, one year we were struck by 4 hurricanes almost simultaneously, north, south, east, west. And so we have experience with hurricanes. And so we have the experience of surviving from hurricanes, not having electricity, not having running water. And so our resilience in the immediate aftermath of the hurricanes is legendary. But nonetheless, resources are needed because, as I should have said before, when people have no income, and I think it was also Dr. Ilcheva who talked about that, if you don't have any income, if you're living month to month, if you're earning less than $10 an hour, you can't just go, and you've gotten paid, you've paid the bills, you've sent money to Haiti, you've paid over 60% of your income on rent, electricity, etc. Whatever remains is so minimal that it's almost cruel. It's almost cruel from our perspective to say, time for you to go, get supplies. Time for you to go do this, because as we say, we don't have money to buy insurance, and we certainly, in some cases, do not have the disposable income to go get supplies. But, you know, the asset is that we have networks of support. You know, we have church, we have this mutual support network within our communities, which, so people will go stay at somebody's house. They may not flee, they have nowhere to go outside of Miami, but somebody will say, my home is more secure, you can come. Churches will make sure that particularly the vulnerable elderly population is sheltered. So there are, you know, again, you know, should be strengthened. You know, the institutions, the organizations, they do exist, and but for that kind of support, many would be in even worse shape during emergency periods. So as I said, radio also, if somebody is in distress, they call the radio and people will send out messages. So, you know, you know, at Salna, we love to build also on the assets. We can't just enumerate the challenges, because we feel that we're building on assets that to make the community more resistant. And I don't like to use the word resilient, I will say resistant. Next slide, please. So in collaboration with, as I said, we've served as a hurricane preparedness hub, supported by, we've been in partnership with Florida Rising and many other community organizations. And this year, again, in collaboration with Florida Rising and a group of collective grassroots organizations, and with the great support of Joanne Pérodin of Florida Rising, we created a survey that we administered to our clients. So about 92 residents of the Northeast Corridor were surveyed to assess their readiness for the 2021 hurricane season. The survey was administered in, well, we say multiple languages, and 89 of the respondents were responding to the Haitian Creole survey, 2 in English and 1 in Spanish. And so the results are that, you know, 30% indicated limited access to transportation, to the grocery store, even before the hurricane. So we have a highly transit dependent community. 45% indicated access to transportation, that they had access to transportation in the event of an evacuation. Again, underscores transit dependent, because most people are talking about cars. So again, it tells you the issue of transit, public transportation dependency. 80% did not know whether mental health services were offered in their community in general. 81 did not know medical or mental health services available during, and I would say even in the immediate aftermath of a disaster. 82% did not know how to order prescriptions in the event of a hurricane. You know, people just didn't know, didn't even understand what they were talking about, even in Creole. 81% did not know how to find emergency shelters in their area. No clue, and you almost had to explain what an emergency shelter was. 26% provided an email address. And we think that's important because, again, it speaks of, they provided an email address because they had one. And for many of the respondents, again, we had to explain what an email address was. It wasn't sort of, they didn't sort of know it automatically because they were saying, yeah, my address is, you know, 13390. And we had said, no, that's not what we're talking about, an email address. So it took time to explain what an email address was because, you know, a great percentage, over, you know, 70% did not know what an email address was and did not have one. And 97% provided a phone number. So most definitely had access to a phone and an iPhone, and not an iPhone. I don't know what the other word is, but so the other issues are also that while people are familiar with hurricanes, there's always a lack of understanding about what causes them, why they come, the relationships between hurricanes and flood, because this is a community that lives in an extremely vulnerable flood area. There are, any heavy rains in that region means that you almost have to swim your way through or row your way through some of the streets in North Miami. And so there's very little understanding of when we talk about climate, when we talk about climate change, very little information about that. And unfortunately, this is a community, again, because of its roots in Haiti, absolutely understands what climate change feels like. We understand what climate change feels like. We know that the fields burn sometimes because of heat. We know that there are flash floods sometimes, even with very little rain. And so, our challenge at Salna is to, create, as the hub, really create a vehicle to explain not just hurricanes, but what causes hurricanes and what causes this increased number of very ferocious and destructive hurricanes. So that's going to be it. I'm open to questions later, but again, I just want to say that as Dr. Ilcheva said in her presentation, our vulnerability rests squarely in the fact that we are a very low income community, and also to the fact that information is not disseminated in the way in which we receive it. And so preparedness, particularly to a significant number of residents of Miami-Dade County, really demands that we think of ways in which our information is communicated. Just because the information is translated in Creole does not mean that it will reach its most vulnerable population and still leaves our residents really open to suffering. And I haven't even talked about what happens when their properties are damaged and what the insurance companies do to these folks who are either insured or underinsured. So that's a whole other story, but I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonie. Very good. Excellent. All right, at this time, we'll go ahead and do and answer some questions that we may have. So Lillian, do you have a few there that you want to read and we can answer?
Sure. Let me see. There was a question, if I can find where the questions were. There was a question regarding policy. Here we go. From Dan Castro. It reads, how can we utilize the information we have and can collect to inform resiliency and mitigation policy at a local and state level, given that the cost coupled with low probability events fuel myopic behaviors? I would pivot to Maria for this one. Maria?
Sure. Thanks, Lillian. And I'll have Erik and Leonie pitch in as well. But from the perspective of the data that we're collecting, this goes to the heart of it. What use is it if we don't make good decisions based on it, right? We have all of this data. I have it. Leonie presented great information, very specific to the Haitian community. We have information on the barriers to preparedness for the Hispanic community and many others. But how do we act on it? Well, it's not a simple answer, so good answers really are very simple, but my answer goes to, is linked to what I said earlier, that we cannot just look up to government. We cannot also expect just that individuals will make sound decisions. It has to be a more concerted effort with the understanding of what the barriers are. So when we talk about individual responsibilities, I mean, I don't think individuals will shy away from responsibility if they had the means. First, obviously, economic resilience. And if they had the information about the risk that would allow them to make good decisions. So there is a role for government to play in that. How do we build economic resilience? Well, it's part of economic development strategies. That's why when we talk about hurricane preparedness and mitigation, we cannot completely divorce that issue from the challenges we have in terms of transportation, in terms of the environment, in terms of economic development, in terms of information access, in terms of migration in our communities. We need to think about it holistically. So when governments invest in economic development, when growing the business community, in diversifying the economy, it's ultimately an investment in resilience as well. As we improve economic conditions for our residents, we increase the chances that they will make those good decisions that will allow us to be sustainable and not to suffer the impacts of these disasters. So to sum it up, I see individual responsibility as part of the answer, but also government should be aware of how their decisions are linked to preparedness, and our business community also has a role to play. They need to be acting in a way that protects not just property, but protects their workers and protects their assets and long-term revenue potential as well. Erik, Leonie, do you want to add anything?
Can you remind me what the question was, please?
Sure.
How do we use, I think the question is about how do we use this information to become better at preparing our communities and mitigating the impacts of disasters?
Well, like I said, we have to be able to use that information, not just translate it, first of all. I don't believe in literal translations of information, which I found that a lot of the material that we have available, particularly for, and I can't speak for other communities, but for the Haitian community, is sort of this translation of one world's reality into a language, and it's almost meaningless. Like I told you, I had to explain what email address was, right? When we're doing the survey, I had to tell people. So, translating it doesn't mean that people will get it, because you have to talk about a mail that's coming through your computer, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that what's important about using this information is to massage it and deliver it in a culturally and, of course, linguistically accurate manner, because translating is not enough if the language itself does not fit with somebody's reality. So I can talk about climate change, I can talk about all these issues, but people will just blank out, except that if I talk in agricultural terms, and I said, do you remember like back in Haiti when blah, 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 people will absolutely get it. And so that's what is important to me is that we have to find a way in which we communicate to the community in a way that connects it to the way it's reality.
And the only thing I think I'll add to that briefly is, earlier this year, FIU, we received a large grant from the Mellon Foundation, and it involves many departments at FIU, and it will then move forward with activities looking forward now, how we can do better as a community in South Florida for everyone. And as Maria said, for those communities that have challenges and barriers, and then working together with local governments and so on, that work has started. And in the next several years, we look forward to what'll come out of all of that work from the grant.
Yeah, we're a partner
Right.
with that program, and we're very thrilled about that, because again, it gives us the opportunity to apply what was, because we're really strong advocates for, communicating, especially for emergencies and for education in a different way.
There you go. All right, Lillian, anything else?
So Sherry would like to know how anyone can access a copy of the city preparedness survey.
Well, first of all, we'll have this recording available for everyone on our website, on YouTube. But the full survey results, I'm assuming the question is about the 2021 hurricane preparedness poll. The full results will be released in the next few weeks. As I said, we just the data was just collected about 2 weeks ago, so I gave you some snippets of it. I'll prepare a more detailed report. And it will be available through our website. You have our contact information, so keep in touch, Shari, and we'll send it to you when it becomes available.
I would love Dr. Salna's presentation also, but I would love to have something added for renters, because a lot of the presentation is focused on homeowners, and I think that renters also need to understand how to protect themselves and their belongings. So yeah, I would love that presentation.
Yeah, excellent and great point.
So Christian, one of our attendees, is looking for answers regarding long-term recovery and what do we expect to unfold in Miami-Dade County regarding the types of decisions and processes following a major hurricane. Related to displacement, accessing government assistance, and what does that mean for our low wealth residents?
Great question, Christian. I think I'll start first and just echo what I said about decisions related to land use and coastal development in vulnerable areas in particular. We need to, again, knowing what the risks are and the fact that they will likely continue increasing as we experience sea level rise, climate change, and water inundation and more intense hurricanes. It wouldn't behoove us to continue rebuilding in these areas. So in case of, I know the focus is always on rebuilding. People like where they live, are connected to the places where they live. But we also need to think about the long term. We cannot keep building properties in the same flood-prone areas as we've always done, and knowing that the risks will not diminish in the future. The challenge is, and I'm glad you kind of at the end of your question, as I'm reading it, you're asking about our more vulnerable, low-income residents. The expectation and the likelihood is that government will need to step in and be involved in relocating them to areas that are less vulnerable. There is simply no way around that if we're thinking long term, and we do need to start thinking about the long term. I mentioned in the survey results that expectation already exists, that governments will need to step in. But what I didn't mention, and that will be in the larger report from the survey results, was we asked a question about residents' willingness to participate in the buyout program. You've probably heard that there is an opportunity for properties that are flooded to be bought out by with federal funds that flows to local governments, but using federal funds. As a way to stop development in such vulnerable areas. The interest is very low. So people in general, Florida residents in general are reluctant to participate in such a program, to sell their properties to the government and relocate. As I said, we are attached to where we live. We like the neighborhood. We like the particular structure in which we're housed. So it will be challenging to go through this this process. And the only I think what may solve it for us is eventually when insurance costs become really unaffordable and people really start thinking about what does it take for me to own a house on the beach if every year it gets pounded by a hurricane, my ground floor gets flooded, I have my property destroyed, and the insurance company doesn't cover these costs. So through the insurance sector, that may be resolved eventually.
I mean, I would also like to add that, zoning departments, zoning codes should address that issue. There should be, there's someone called Charlene Devani from Carnegie Mellon who's advocate for climate change zoning, right? So that when you are building in areas that are prone to flooding, even in the urban core, and we're talking about neighborhoods like Little Haiti, there should be now increased attention paid to that because, with the idea of climate change gentrification and the sort of racial implication, most Black people and poor people are pushed to areas that are less desirable, and these are areas that are also prone to flooding. And so she proposes this new idea that zoning should even be account for the fact that these are flood zone and that they will impact the population, and that the building requirements should be adapted to the fact that folks are living in flood zones. So I find that sort of climate change zoning, this notion, very interesting.
Lillian?
Sure. And I think we'll take this final question from Susan, who asks if there's anyone who is producing information for tourists who are vacationing here and find that a hurricane is coming, and if there's any information that hotels can provide to vacationers.
I think Erik showed us one of the resources through the Miami-Dade County Emergency Preparedness Department. I'm not sure to what extent they're thinking about tourists necessarily, and I personally haven't seen such information in hotels, which doesn't mean it's not there, but it may become available only when there's a hurricane directly threatening our area. I don't know. Erik, do you have any better information on that score?
Not much more than that, other than I have seen a few examples of weather and hurricane information in the lobby of a hotel saying that, in the event of an event, this is information you can turn to, but I have not seen a lot of that. And so, each hotel, has to provide customer service and information at the time, and how much each one does, to what extent, is a great question.
Good question, Susan. You're making us think and giving us an area that we can research a little bit more.
I might add, I think the question also relates to anybody who travels, I think, into this area during hurricane season probably needs to think about either getting insurance or having a credit card that would help them evacuate or deal with cancellation costs. That's that's the reality of vacationing, I think, in this area. I guess you have to be an informed consumer if you're coming down here during the hurricane season. That is a reality. It's just something to keep in mind, I think, when you're vacationing here.
And that you're exactly correct, and that becomes a challenge for many tourists. They they plan a vacation months ahead of time, and let's say they had booked a resort in the Keys for the 4th of July weekend. Well, there wasn't really a mandatory evacuation, but a case like that, Then it comes down to, right, cancellations, even flights. Tampa International Airport, they shut down inbound flights for a period yesterday. They're reopened now, but flight cancellations, hotel cancellations, right, that becomes quite a complicated problem. And so, yeah, for the consumers to understand and know what are the details when those things happen. And I think I did see one question earlier, just briefly. I don't know if it's still there, but it had to do again about that 12-part video series. It's a free resource available online. So there's no special code or access or what have you. It's just on the Museum Discovery and Science website, complete free access to get to view those videos.
Okay, so I think that brings us to an end. I would like to thank all of our panelists, our presenters, Dr. Ilcheva, Erik, Leonie, Dr. Frank, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, attendees, for your time. And we hope you join us in our next webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you all.